Izuku Midoriya, a boy that normally in his world would be born without a quirk, especially with a world that is full of quirks. Quirks, or other known as superpowers, Izuku Midoriya would be limited to the brim. But in this regard, Izuku would be born with a brand new quirk. In this universe, Izuku was born with a radioactive quirk. Now, how will this hurt Izuku? How will this help Izuku? Well, we're not sure. Izuku would go through life and eventually learn of this quirk. At the age of 5, him and his mother would head to the doctors, and he'd get a quirk analysis done on him. Quickly, it'd be found out that Izuku had a quirk very similar to just straight up radiation, nuclear radiation. A radioactive quirk that would make just day-to-day tasks extremely hard. So, Inko Midoriya, his mother, would have to put tons and tons of money into getting her son brand new materials, brand new gear, to basically limit his quirk to the point that he wasn't radioactive to everyone else. But unfortunately, even that clothing would be limited to a certain extent, forcing Izuku to practically be homeschooled, and he would be put into quarantined areas until he was fully able to learn how to use his quirk. But everything felt like it was going in circles. How would he be able to learn this radioactive quirk without help? But he can't have help from anybody else. Frankly, what was he supposed to do? If he had someone else help him, they'd get radioactive poisoning or radiation poisoning and probably die within days. So how would he learn how to do his quirk? Would he live in a bubble for the rest of his life? He hoped that this wouldn't be the case, and he'd hoped that maybe one day someone would come and be able to train him. And maybe, just maybe, that day was today, at the age of only 8 years old. Izuku would live basically in quarantine all the way to the age of 8. Izuku would actually get visits from some of his friends, mostly Bakugo. Actually, they've been friends since literal birth, as if they were just friends since childhood. So he visits Izuku from time to time, showing off his quirk, and Izuku is just sad that his quirk is as deadly as it is. But Bakugo would tell him that maybe one day that he can be, well, a hero, that he'll have a quirk extremely strong. There's a reason why he's in this quarantine. He has to have an extremely strong quirk. Of course, Izuku knows his quirk, but nobody else really does. Frankly, there was really no reason for him to tell anybody else. So Izuku would continue on with just living life, and at the end of that year, in terms of him being 8 years old, someone would approach the house. Actually, 2 people. A little mouse, and also a guy with an oddly looking scarf. They would ask to be let in, and Inko Midoriya, his mother, begins to say that maybe that's not the best idea. Her son has a very interesting quirk to the fact that if they're not careful, they can definitely get hurt. But again, the man insists, saying that they are from UA High School and telling her that is really no problem at all. So they enter the house and they begin looking entirely, getting a nice little tour of their home. It's nothing crazy, it's a nice humble abode, and they walk in and walk through. Aizawa looks at every single room and eventually comes across a room that looks very similar to just an odd shaped bubble. He walks in to see that Izuku is there. Everything is sectioned off so that they can walk in and out of the room without getting hurt by his quirk. Until Aizawa basically approaches the bubble and tells Inko to let him out. Let him out? We can't let him out. That's not a thing. He's gonna hurt people. Aizawa shakes his head and activates his quirk. Don't worry, let him out. As long as we contain what's left inside, we'll be fine. There will be no residue on his body. That's how his quirk works. His quirk will basically absorb into his body. That's what we need to teach him how to do, specifically that. They eventually let him out. Obviously, Inko is very hesitant, and in a long time, Izuku can finally hug his mother. It's odd. They question how this is even possible, and Aizawa explains. Aizawa explains that his quirk allows him to do such a thing. It allows him to cancel a quirk out, and it kinda is beneficial for a quirk like his. They want to bring Izuku to UA. They want to bring him and his mother to a brand new place that is a little bit further away from at least the city, and have him train at UA all the time, hopefully getting him to the point where he can completely control his quirk. And at this moment, they actually have their specialists working on a suit for Izuku to use. A suit that can basically withstand his radiation entirely, but not basically make him feel extremely uncomfortable. Izuku and his mother would eventually get moved away, and this process would be long and arduous. Of course, they have a suit already that would allow him to basically go out maybe an hour a day. So they use that suit to basically get him to that new home with its own quarantine area. But the new quarantine area is a giant area, giving Izuku far more place to roam and far more place to actually move around compared to his original little room. So Izuku waits on UA to arrive, and when they do, Aizawa brings him this odd-looking suit. A suit that has this radiation symbol plastered on its chest, but as if it was a special tailor-made hero suit for him. Izuku puts it on, and it's as if this clear face cover goes over his face, but then a gear shifts so that on top of his mouth, and it's some sort of just mask. This mask covers one part, but it leaves his eyes open so that he can actually see properly and not have some weird fragmented vision in a way. So they have special technology that would basically have his top of his face, or everything beyond his eyes and obviously up to his hair, would allow him to see through. So this allows Izuku to actually roam the area around with basically no trouble at all. It seems like this suit works constantly 24/7, and once Izuku is able to learn how to control his quirk and how to reside that radiation within his body, then he'll be able to take that suit off. And of course, he can use it from time to time, maybe to even channel the radiation into maybe more concentrated blasts. But to start out with everything, there's always a beginning to that eventual end, and hopefully the eventual master of his quirk. From the age of 8 all the way to the age of about 14 to 15, that's what he would be doing. Still getting basically classes, learning and stuff like that, but he would never go back to his original school. He would actually tell Bakugo about the occurrence, and Bakugo would be pretty surprised. He's happy to hear that his best friend will eventually learn to use his quirk, but he is a bit bitter that he's able to get personal training from UA, the school that they've both been wanting to go to since day one. But Bakugo is determined that he's going to be the #1 student going into UA, and he'll make sure that's the case. Obviously, in this circumstance, Izuku probably won't even have to take the UA entrance exam, meaning there is no chance for him to become the number one student. But let's be honest, is there really a chance for someone that hasn't trained their quirk, doesn't even know how to use their quirk by all means necessary? Would he even be able to be the #1 student in that class, especially in the very beginning? In my opinion, most likely not. Izuku's been struggling and will still struggle from the age of 8 to 14 trying to control his quirk, but at least he's got it to the point where he can keep it within his body. Soon, at the age of 12, he actually is able to keep it within his body, and at the age of 14, he actually learns how to use it or expel it and then retract it back into his body. It's an odd process, he believes, but if he focuses hard enough, he could expel all his radiation and in an instant, suck it all within himself once again. Yeah, that might sound really weird, but Izuku has the ability to do so. He has a perfect control, quote unquote, of radioactive material, so he can absorb radioactive material to even get stronger. When I say perfect control, that's all theoretical. Of course, perfect control in the near future, or hopefully in the near future, Izuku will be able to do such a thing. But in terms of radiation now, he's still trying to focus on keeping it within his body. Yes, he can keep it within his body, but when emotions get high, when he gets pissed, angry, anything, those leakages do happen. The radiation begins to seep out of his skin as if it were sweat, and begins to actually leak and make others feel sick. So they actually did get him this odd looking wristwatch that would basically monitor his radiation. If it began to spike, that means his emotions were getting too high or getting too low, or basically would go over the limit that basically he needed to keep the radiation within his body, and he'd get a notification of that, forcing it to a certain point, or if his radiation got too high, immediately the watch would go off and basically put a protective layer over his body. Now he doesn't have to wear the suit, but he still needs this watch to regulate himself entirely, at least until he can fully control it. Well, let's just say Deku continues on training, 14, 15, and until the very beginning of UA. That was the whole goal for Aizawa, and unfortunately Aizawa would eventually have to leave him to his own methods, because frankly he can't be there all the time. That's not the case. But luckily Izuku got it to the point that he doesn't have to worry, at least about, nuking the entirety of the school while he's by himself. He begins training on his own, slowly but surely learning how to use this quirk, and actually some of the higher ranked students, or the students that are in higher grades, begin to notice Izuku, and they've been noticing him every so often, but frankly this was the first time they actually seriously noticed him. The big three was actually introduced to Izuku by Aizawa, telling them that he, or Izuku, obviously without his knowledge, or Aizawa telling Izuku this, has the potential of being one of the strongest heroes on the planet. Radioactive material is something that might be man-made, but it is extremely powerful. Think about this. Izuku has the potential of basically being as powerful as a multitude of nukes. Nuclear bombs that could blow up the Earth multiple times over. That's how strong Izuku is if he learns how to control it properly. But that doesn't mean he'll be able to control it that properly. We're talking about power that is nuclear. Power that is basically planet destructive power. Would he be able to control it entirely? Not right now. But Aizawa makes it pretty clear to the big three, which is Nejire, Tamaki, and also Mirio, that this boy has potential beyond any of theirs. But there's going to be a long road ahead, and he wants them to keep a bit of an eye out for him. Not watch him like a babysitter, but keep an eye out, check how he's doing from time to time, and maybe ask him some questions about what's going on. And Mirio would do that. The day before the first day of UA, he would walk up to Izuku, asking him a bunch of questions, Izuku questioning who he is, and he admits that he's part of the big three. Izuku says that he doesn't really need a babysitter. He understands that his quirk is dangerous, but that's why he's here. He's trying to control it. He's trying to get better. And Mirio says that he understands that 100%, and he's not a babysitter. He wants to check on Izuku because he knows how strong he is. The potential of Izuku seems to be limitless, and he tells that just straight up to him, right in front of him. Izuku is not sure if he should believe him, but frankly, does he necessarily have either a choice or necessarily even have a reason not to believe him? Nonetheless, he thanks him. Izuku thanks him for at least looking out for him, but to not worry, that he promises that he's going to master this quirk and that he will not let anybody down. Mirio says that he knows, and he actually wants to fight Izuku. Fight me? That's a horrible idea. If I use my quirk improperly, I could kill you. Nah, don't worry about it. Trust me, I have an idea. Izuku's confused. He doesn't know what to say, but he decides to fight Mirio. But he can't hit him. By all means, Izuku can't even keep up. He tries to channel anything he possibly can, until one strike, he bursts out of his feet in a way, as if it was some explosion. He goes launching toward Mirio and almost lands that punch, but he just phases right through it. Izuku is shocked that he was able to do it, but he sees that he left residue of radiation and even kind of tagged Mirio with radiation. He tells Mirio not to breathe, and he immediately puts out his hand and he just sucks the radiation right back into his body. Mirio's impressed by that and even asks how he did that. How did he close the distance so fast? If it wasn't for Mirio's reaction speed, he would have definitely landed a clean blow. I don't know. I really don't. I haven't really tested that much, but it's as if you got me mad enough and it reacted. My radioactive part of my quirk reacted? Izuku doesn't know. He doesn't even know what to say, but Mirio says that if he doesn't mind, he wants to talk to Aizawa about that. He'll explain what happened, and this little spar session will be between both of them. But he's pretty impressed. He's about to be a first year, and he can definitely slug around a good bit. He was able to take some damage from Mirio and actually shrug it off. It seems like his defenses is pretty good. Of course, he doesn't know why. Maybe his body has adapted to radioactive material to the point that degradation doesn't really happen within the body. So maybe when he lands blows, punches, stuff like that, maybe Izuku can recover a lot quicker than most people. That's just a theory. Obviously, Mirio doesn't know for sure, but nonetheless, he sends Izuku on his way to his to his dorm. Izuku's been staying in the dorms recently because he's been basically on crunch time. He needs to just get as much training in as possible before, well, the first day of UA. And he was able to do exactly that. Luckily, he feels comfortable enough to be around other people, so maybe, just maybe, he won't have any incidents happen. Izuku enters his classroom, and with all the other students as well, and he sits down. And this time around, he does wear this hybrid mask, at least to put on his face. Nothing too crazy, for a matter of fact. He's not wearing his entire suit anymore. He still has his wristwatch on, but it's a small mask that basically makes sure that his radiation doesn't leak from his mouth and doesn't leak from basically that part of his face. Because frankly, radiation leaking from face level to someone else's face level would probably not be the best idea, or at least the best instance, because he might be able to retract that radiation, but they'll probably still get a little bit sick from it. So at least if he gets radiation on someone's shoes, shirt, pants, whatever, he can kind of retract it, and there really wouldn't be any repercussions because he can kind of take away all residue before their body absorb any bit of radiation. So Izuku continues on. He waits for his class, he begins to write in his journal everything he's learned so far, things he's heard from Mirio, and begins to write down the 3 names of the big 3. He knows that he'll be seeing them a little bit more often here, so he finds it pretty interesting and might as well. He continues to write down and even write quirks down. He's heard about a ton of quirks just from Aizawa, not really getting any descriptions, but hearing about each quirk, writing about a gravity quirk, an explosion quirk, which he assumes is Bakugo, continues to write down that someone has a frog quirk, a sound quirk, and various other things, and he continues to write these things down, but he doesn't have a face to any of them. Eventually, those faces would come. He meets all of his classmates, and then eventually, he meets Bakugo, face to face and in person. It's been a while, a long time since they've actually been face to face. At least the last time they've done that is when they were kids, little kids, about 3 to 4 years old. Bakugo asks if he's safe to even touch. Can they even shake hands, anything? And Izuku pats him on the shoulder and says that he has somewhat control over it. There's nothing to worry about now, or at least at the moment. Izuku kind of laughs this off, and Bakugo basically shrugs and laughs as well, saying that it's nice to see him here. But Bakugo says that he is number 1, and he promised that he would be. And Izuku is going to have to catch up now, and that is a promise. Izuku is confused until basically Aizawa forces them all to sit down. Izuku knows the way of Aizawa, knows how he acts, knows how he treats people, so he'll realize a lot of things that students are doing that will definitely make Aizawa frustrated, at least, or to say the least. Nonetheless, Aizawa will continue on, teaching and telling everybody exactly what they're going to be doing until a young lady by the name of Ochako Uraka asks him about orientation. Of course, Aizawa says that orientation does not matter. He's not here to basically make them feel good, make them feel great, whatever. They've gotten enough praise, basically throughout their lives, and he refuses to allow that to continue. Aizawa says they'll be doing a test. They'll be doing a quirk test, and to meet him outside after they get changed. They all get changed, and everybody questions about Izuku's mask, asking if that's like a special thing that he got, and he says that it's just precaution, just in case he kind of overloads on radiation, but everything should be okay. Bakugo says that it better be because he doesn't want radiation poisoning because Izuku's being an idiot. Izuku kind of laughs this off and says that he'll be just fine. And then eventually Aizawa announces the first thing, the ball toss, that they'll be tossing a ball as far as possible, very similar to what they did in middle school, but obviously Izuku didn't do it at all, but he's done other training similar, and they'll be throwing the ball as far as possibly can. And the first person to go is the number 1 student in the class, which is Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku looks at him and realizes that Bakugo was not lying. Bakugo is the number 1 student in their class. Good to hear for him, because he wants to see his best friend actually do well. Of course, they are best friends. Bakugo still has that nitty-gritty attitude he always has, but nonetheless, they're good friends, and There was no reason for Bakugo to feel the need to bully Izuku, especially when he for one had a quirk, and he was under so much pressure and struggle. Why would you bully someone like that? At least in this version of My Hero Academia. So Bakugo comes up to the stand, walks up and grabs the ball and gets ready to throw it. Using his quirk, he blasts the ball and almost soars 1,000 meters. That's pretty impressive according to Aizawa, and Bakugo says that good luck on beating that. Aizawa then asks who wants to go next. Everybody begins to chatter, and a girl by the name of Ashido Mina walks up to Izuku asking if this is normally how everything is. She's heard rumors that he's been here for a while, and she begins to ask about, well, why does this seem like so much fun? Izuku's eyes grow wide and he slaps himself on the forehead. You probably shouldn't have said that, but we'll live with the repercussions. As Izuku says this, Aizawa begins to activate his quirk. Fun, huh? Okay, let's add some stakes. Whoever's last place, you get expelled. Seriously though, who's up next? Izuku raises his hand and says that he'll go. But Aizawa is confused. Aizawa personally thinks that Izuku can't do much. He's heard the whole Mirio thing, but of course, that's so small. We're talking about a sample size that he doesn't even know how to control. Izuku's gonna be practically just a normal person. He's expecting Izuku to probably get average scores, maybe about middle of the pack, maybe like high end of the pack. Nothing crazy. He's not gonna get last. He knew that for sure, but still. Izuku walks up and grabs the ball, and Aizawa questions if he really has this under control, and Izuku nods. He slightly leaks radiation out of his hand, and he throws the ball, and sparks begin to fly, erupting in his hand. The ball goes hurling at insane speeds, and eventually the radar goes off and says 800 meters. Bakugo is shocked. He was told by Izuku himself that he barely knew how to use his quirk, that he was able to contain it, but this is utilizing it. That's so similar to his own quirk. How is he able to do that? And when they get the ball back, there's no radiation on it at all. Aizawa even asks him to tap his watch on the ball to see if there is any radiation. He does, and there's zero. He was able to not only utilize his radiation within his hand, but retract it right after. Aizawa is impressed. He looks at Izuku and nods. Impressive, kid. Looks like all that training paid off. He nods as well and walks toward Bakugo and stands next to him. Bakugo punches him hard on the shoulder and tells him to not lie to him again, and maybe they'll have to do a little sparring session to see whose quirk is truly the strongest. Izuku kind of laughs about it and says that he would still be no match for Bakugo at this moment, that Bakugo's utilization of his quirk is far better than his own. Izuku kind of just shrugs off the idea of a sparring session, and Bakugo is kind of okay with the answer. Nonetheless, everybody questions what does Aizawa mean about the training paid off, and he tells them straight up, without saying or sugarcoating anything, Izuku has been here since the age of about 8.5, maybe a little bit older than that, and he's been training with his quirk. And they ask him why? Why would they do that? Like, why would he get special treatment? And he immediately tells them that he lived in a bubble from the age of 5 to the age of 8. That his quirk was so dangerous that he couldn't even go outside. And that they paid a ton of money just for a suit that would allow him to stay outside for 30 to an hour every day. Sometimes it wouldn't even work and Izuku wouldn't be able to go outside. He would have to stay in, do work with complete isolation, and his only friend was the person right there. And he points at Bakugo, knowing about their backstory from obviously Izuku talking about it every so often when he was younger. And immediately all of them are shocked. This kid, he's worked so hard? This kind of gives them a sense of urgency. Maybe it is time to work that much harder. Not everything will be handed to them anymore. This actually makes all of them try a good bit more than usual. And they go throughout the entirety of this quirk assessment kind of exam. Izuku trying to emulate a lot of what Bakugo is doing. He's trying to use his radioactive kind of explosions to propel him forward, but of course he's not that much of a natural involving it. He actually, during the race, has a little bit of crash and burnout. He kind of hurts himself a bit, but nonetheless, he gets some pretty good scores and he ranks in the top 10. Of course, some things are harder than others and he's not able to really do them very well, but of course he's going to be slightly better than most people. When the quirk assessment is over, it's actually a girl by the name of Hagakure that gets revealed to be the last place person. Unfortunately, she's going to be expelled. Well, Izuku kind of laughs, and they're all like, whoa, that's horrible, why would you laugh about that? But Izuku just continues to laugh, and Aizawa slightly chuckles, kind of out of the ordinary that they've seen so far, and he kind of clears his throat. Don't worry, none of you are getting expelled. It was just a logical ruse to make you try your hardest. Sort of. Izuku just shrugs as well, and he tells all of them to go get changed, and that they'll be finishing out the day, or the rest of this day. After that day is over, a bunch of people do question this kind of the relationship Izuku has with Aizawa, but he kind of just says that Aizawa is their sensei, just like he is his, and that he's just had more time to get accustomed to Aizawa and his quote-unquote humor? The way he acts? He doesn't know. But Aizawa is funny in his eyes. I mean, to a certain extent. He kind of laughs about the fact that he expels people, then brings them back and stuff like that. And he thinks it's a great idea. But nonetheless, everybody else thinks it's some cruel trick. Izuku kind of doesn't really care very much about it, but he then begins to hear about what they're going to do for that day. Aizawa walks in and begins to explain the agenda, explaining that someone special is actually going to come. Someone that actually Izuku doesn't know is coming, and it's actually the #1 hero. All Might comes blasting through the door, telling everybody that he is here. I am here, walking through the door like a normal person. All Might reveals himself immediately and says that they will be doing hero versus villain training. So they'll all be heading out and getting on their brand new hero suits. Izuku hears this and he doesn't know what his hero suit is, and it's actually just an advanced version, like he had before, of his radioactive suit in a way. But in this regard, this new suit that was actually done in a day's notice, by the way, is actually a suit that will basically allow him to use his quirk a lot better than any other suit he's even had. It seems that it actually can control his radiation, at least output, even better than anything he's ever had in the first place, taking kind of the load off Izuku in terms of stamina, strain, and stuff like that, when trying to make sure that his radiation doesn't leak out to basically kill everybody in the school. Nonetheless, the suit is almost perfect, and a girl, actually, by the name of Hatsume, created it, made it extremely, extremely good, and Izuku is pretty happy about it. After they all get changed, they go down to Ground Gamma, and when they arrive, Izuku actually begins to speak with All Might himself. He's super excited, actually kind of jittery. He's kind of panicking. All Might is kind of his idol, so of course he wants to talk to him as much as possible, asking All Might various questions about this or that, and All Might says that he's heard about Izuku, and he's actually pretty proud to hear that a young man like him would push and traverse all, basically, adversity to get to this point, and that it's pretty inspiring to everybody. He tells All Might that All Might's the one that is inspiring, and that he'd love to get an autograph after this is kind of done, their training. And All Might says he'll of course do that, and then maybe one day they can train a bit together. And this makes Izuku almost faint, and Bakugo kind of walks up behind Izuku and flicks him on the back of the head, telling him to focus up. All Might then eventually explains the whole ordeal or predicament that they're going to be going through. It's actually pretty simple, but this time around, compared to what he's done with others, he'll make it a 1 versus 1. And they'll actually be able to choose. A 1 versus 1, though, that deals in something extremely different. Hero versus villain. And behind the hero is a ton of civilians. If that villain crosses a certain line, then, well, the villain wins. But if the hero either captures the villain, knocks him out, or stops the villain from being across the line for about over 3 seconds, then the hero wins. The hero can win in various ways, but frankly, the villain has the more simple way to win. He just needs to cross that line, or he, she, whatever needs to cross that line, and if they're over that line for 3 seconds, then they win. It's really that simple. Izuku begins to stare at All Might and just listen more and more as All Might begins to say that here are the matches. And the first match they'll be seeing is Izuku Midoriya versus Katsuki Bakugo. Immediately, Izuku is shocked to hear this, and Bakugo clenches his fist and slams it into his hand as a small explosion occurs. You got it, nerd. Me and you. I want to see how strong you truly are. You rejected my idea of getting a little bit of a spar in, but now you don't have a choice. Hope you're ready. All Might says that it's not quite on yet, that they'll have to choose who's the villain and who's the hero, and Bakugo points at himself that he's the hero, that he'll give the nerd the handicap, and that he will be the villain. Izuku smiles and says that he shouldn't be underestimated, and it won't be that simple. They both head out to this street, a simple street with a building right behind Bakugo, and a nice line that goes right across the street, indicating the area Izuku needs to get to. Bakugo stands ready, with his gauntlets, or his grenade gauntlets, ready to go as well, and Izuku stands there, ready to go too. Izuku stares at Bakugo, and instead of running forward, Bakugo knows that protecting the line about 5 feet forward, or 5 yards forward, would be the best way to go about it. So he stands his ground, ready with his bracers as Izuku, on the count of 3, as All Might counts them down, all the way to 0. Izuku blasts forward using his radioactive quirk, ready to take on his childhood friend, Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku Midoriya goes flying forward, blasting forward using practically the same technique Bakugo more or less implies. He has far less control. Obviously, he's not used to his quirk, nowhere near as Bakugo is, but he flies forward, but Bakugo is able to counter relatively easily. He's able to smash and punch Izuku in the opposite direction, holding him off relatively easily. It seems that Bakugo's motion and Bakugo's movement is far greater than Izuku's. Izuku needs to find another way to get past him, use any training he's ever had using his quirk to try his best to do so. But even that is extremely difficult, so he decides that he's going to go hand-to-hand combat off the rip. He walks toward Bakugo, and Bakugo smirks, saying that I guess it's time for an actual fight. Immediately they begin to use hand-to-hand combat to more or less try and fight each other, Izuku having that hybrid advantage, but nonetheless Bakugo can still utilize his quirk in these close quarters. Izuku can as well. During these conflicts that him and Bakugo are having though, he uses slight bits of radiation to actually and hopefully slow down Bakugo in the usage of his quirk. This is something he wanted to try out in the first place, and this would be a great way to try it out. He tries to make Bakugo fall asleep, more or less using the radiation to make him lightheaded and restrict his breathing. But that would end up being a terrible idea once Bakugo figures out how to counter it. Immediately Izuku tries to use his radiation, kind of this gas form of it, but when he tries to do so, Bakugo sees the opportunity, backs up, and blasts as much explosives as possible. When he does, the radiated gas actually does the opposite of what Izuku wanted to do. It blasts right back at him, and he's actually not, and is straight up unable to counteract the effect that it's going to have, bluntly hitting him as hard as possible and blasting him away into a building. He slowly gets up, but he can feel that part of his suit is not only ripped, but he is mildly injured. He tries to walk toward Bakugo and actually try to fight back, but he can feel that his body hurts extremely bad. It seems to be failing him extremely quickly. He can't really contain the radiation as well as he once was, and he turns on his watch. When he does, it contains the radiation, but it basically puts him at such a disadvantage now that there's really no way of him continuing this fight. He collapses to the ground and just passes out entirely. Bakugo picks him up and begins to run him back toward All Might and the people, or his fellow students, and obviously Bakugo has won the fight. But Bakugo's confused. He's been training his quirk this entire time. What made this occur? it actually seems as if this radiation in his body is kind of slowly but surely changing. There's various amounts of radiation, at least the one right now was more of a nuclear-like radiation, but it seems like his body is actually developing various different forms of radiation. Right now, it's slowly but surely drifting into gamma radiation. Gamma radiation very similar to something that would give him regenerative powers. It seems as if his big wound is actually healing, but in terms of this, his body reacted on its own. Izuku was unknown to this radioactive occurrence, and it actually drained his stamina entirely. He wasn't entirely out of the fight. He can fight with a small wound or like a wound in his back. He'd be okay. But with this drastic change in radiation and gamma radiation trying to recover his body, it seems to have drained his stamina entirely. So when he gets there, there is no wound on his body, but Izuku is in some sort of catatonic state at this moment. They bring him to Recovery Girl, and she explains just that. There's nothing wrong with him at all. It's just he's out cold from, it seems, his body recovering at such a rapid rate. The gamma radiation must have seeped through his wounds and instantly healed them, very similar to what they've seen basically on TV shows. If you give an example, you would see like the Hulk being able to regenerate most injuries, if not all, at an extremely rapid rate, but Izuku's body wasn't prepared for it by any means. So when it happened, he passed out. Izuku obviously didn't know about this and is out cold for a little bit. Actually, when he wakes up, he hears something extremely disturbing. He hears about his class being locked down in the USJ. He's not sure exactly what happened or even what's going on, but Izuku asks if he can go help something, but of course he's rejected on that. They say that there's pro-heroes that are gathering up and they're going to help right now, but Izuku doesn't want to hear that. What is he doesn't want to just sit around and do nothing. People over there are getting hurt. But of course, Recovery Girl tells him not to worry and that All Might should have it handled. And obviously Recovery Girl reminds him that he just woke up. He can't go do anything crazy. They don't even know what's happening with his body. Of course, Izuku doesn't know either, and that they're going to have to run a ton of tests on him. He's not told this at the moment, but he understands this idea that he is practically a bomb. He is a bomb waiting to happen. He's one reaction, one bad thing could occur, and he could level the entire area or make everything around them inhabitable. So Izuku is definitely an important piece and an important threat. At the end of the day, he still doesn't have full control over his quirk, so that's what they're worrying about right now, and that he should be worrying about himself at this moment. Izuku then just continues to wait. Eventually, he hears about what occurred, and unfortunately, everything kind of falls into place, but All Might was able to get there without everybody being hurt, and most people were actually pretty safe in the overall scheme of things. Even with that said, Izuku isn't really able to speak with his classmates. He's just sent to a facility. It seems like UA has actually endorsed a facility that is going to help him at least contain or learn more about his powers. And quickly they'd find out over the next couple days exactly what his powers do and how they work. It seems that his powers actually deal with every radioactive material. It seems like it doesn't just stop at a radioactive quirk. It has various amounts of different radiations. The two things that they've seen so far is your base nuclear radiation, but also gamma radiation. It seems that the gamma radiation is, like they just discovered now, but we already know, is how he regenerated so quickly. But there's a lot more to gamma radiation than just regenerative powers. It seems like there's a whole different system involved within that. Same thing with nuclear radiation and how he can kind of manipulate his body into making explosions using it. But that takes so much control that it's practically unusable in certain circumstances. And if he's in a certain area and probably a concentrated area, it wouldn't be the best idea to actually use those explosions, given that the radiation is pretty lethal if he's not careful. He didn't actually know this, and he's been kind of just using the explosions and then retracting the radiation back into his body, but they even tell him that yes, that is a fix for now, but that's also a reason why his stamina is getting drained so heavily. It seems like there are a lot of things to think about in terms of his powers, and over the course of 3 to 5 days, it's just all testing. That's all Izuku has been doing. Unfortunately, he hasn't been with his class for a little bit, but soon he would hear about the UA Sports Festival. And the only problem is he can't use his quirk. He's told that due to these occurrences that continue to happen around his quirk, he's actually going to have to limit himself to literally just not using it. And Izuku says that's fine. He doesn't care. He still wants to go out there and show what he can do, and then he'll make sure to master his quirk nonetheless. But just as Aizawa is informed about this, he tells Izuku that it probably wouldn't be the best idea to go out there without you being able to use his quirk. That there's going to be a lot of heroes watching, and that just them knowing that he exists and the quirk the type of quirk he has should be good enough. He doesn't want to go out there and mess up or do anything bad. But Izuku shakes his head and says that he won't. He promises that he's going to give it his best, and that at least he'll try to get to at least past the first round. Aizawa isn't really too fond of the idea of him risking for basically somehow using his quirk outside on accident and maybe hurting somebody, but he's going to allow Izuku to have that choice. He gives Izuku that choice, and he goes out to the UA Sports Festival just as it's about to begin, and the first event is an obstacle course race. Just through sheer, more or less, him having decent skills and just using his IQ, he's able to do pretty well, at least half decent in this regard. Of course, the original Izuku was able to practically make it all the way without using his quirk and actually getting first place without using his quirk at all. And this version of Izuku is actually decently stronger quite a bit because of the training he's had. Of course, he hasn't had like insane amounts of training at this point, but he has been basically learning to use his quirk, which does give him a good stamina boost and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to waste much time with the logistics of it, but Izuku would still rank in about the top 5 or top 10. But of course, he wouldn't do anything as risky as lining up a bunch of explosions to launch himself, because he knows how his quirk works. If he somehow let radiation leak and he basically pops these small little landmines, yeah, it could be pretty catastrophic. Nonetheless, he's able to qualify for the next round, which involves him actually being part of a team. And this team round would more or less involve them trying to grab headbands. Unfortunately, I would say he probably doesn't come out of this round at all. Unfortunately, he would fall slightly short, but nonetheless, he tried his best, and the people with him even thank him for the opportunity. But nonetheless, Izuku is still pretty uplifted in terms of what he's done. He did all this without his quirk. Yes, his quirk is very dangerous, and he sees how powerful and the potential behind it, but he just needs real training. Real training. Basically, someone that can teach him the way of using this quirk without really hurting anybody and trying to maintain that quirk the best he possibly can. Izuku would enter class once again, and everybody would be happy to see him. Obviously, he kind of just ran in randomly in terms of the UA Sports Festival. They haven't seen him too much, and they weren't really allowed to visit him. And he doesn't really say much of what he's been doing. He's been kind of just working here and there in terms of trying to get his quirk stabilized and learn about his quirk, as everyone knows. But nonetheless, Aizawa begins to say that today they'll be choosing their agencies in terms of their little internship. Izuku waits on, and he actually realizes that he got a decent amount of people to reach out to him. It seems that there are some people that want to work with him and learn about his quirk. It seems as if they really want to know exactly how it works, and if maybe they can train him and be known as someone that actually lived up to being able to train someone as strong as Izuku, hopefully in the future, or at least how strong he'll be in the near future. So he decides to look through all of the paper and all of the names, eventually spotting one that actually came straight to his eye, and that is Sir Nighteye. Sir Nighteye himself wants to train him, Nightaye's intentions are a little bit different compared to everyone else's. Nighteye does care about Izuku's well-being and also cares more about actually getting him to perfect his power compared to him actually getting the publicity about it. And Izuku assumed that as much. Nighteye seems to be a class act, so that's exactly what's going to happen. Izuku would obviously wait till the end of the day, confirm where he's going, and actually All Might would approach him, asking him a couple questions about why he chose Nighteye, and he explains exactly why, and All Might says that all would be very true. Nighteye is a stand-up and class act. So Izuku would just feel pretty confident about his choice, and he would actually head over. And luckily, not only is Nighteye going to be there, Mirio is as well. Mirio will actually help him train and get to know his powers a little bit more without the risk of truly hurting Mirio. Frankly, Mirio's quirk is kind of extremely good for this. I would say the best, but Aizawa's would be the best because he can kind of just cancel out the quirk entirely. Nonetheless, their training actually begins. Mirio says that Nighteye is currently out on another mission at the moment, so he's actually kind of just there to train him for the first day, and their sparring session does go a little bit better than, or at least in favor of Izuku, compared to what it was when they first started out. Izuku does know his powers a little bit more, and is starting to actually creep up on the fact of using it to a proper extent. He knows that retracting and putting it, or expelling and retracting that radiation back into his body and out of his body is a huge drain on his stamina. He also knows that when he gets fatal injuries, he has to actually focus on different radiation so that he can either maintain the injury, or basically not get it healed, or heal the injury using the gamma radiation, but properly using it in comparison to last time where the gamma radiation flooded his body, instantly healing him, but also knocking him out because of the rush of radiation that was within his body at such a quick rate. Nonetheless, though, Izuku would slowly but surely learn how to do this over that day. Mirio tells him straight up that he had basically some scary times with his quirk too. He could theoretically just phase straight through the ground right into the Earth's core and just die. Izuku actually relates to this heavily. Obviously, Izuku can also kill himself with his quirk, but more or less can kill a ton of people with his quirk. So that's kind of the more scary part for him personally, but at least Mirio is trying to make some sort of connection with Izuku to make him feel slightly better about the situation. After that day passes and their training kind of finishes up, Izuku begins to train with Sir Nighteye. Sir Nighteye is a lot stricter than Mirio, and Mirio makes this very apparent before their training even starts, but Sir Nighteye says that he sees a lot of potential in him, but he also can't be a person that will sacrifice others in light of being that hero, that he has to be extremely careful, and he's worried about that quirk. He even actually has done a scan on Izuku, seeing his life basically in this weird reel from the eyes of Izuku type of thing, and he sees Izuku being a great hero. He knows he can be. He doesn't exactly see exactly how he'll be that great hero, but he knows that there is a chance. Nighteye then explains. He quickly explains that him and Mirio, after the training with himself obviously, will head out to a nearby city, get some patrols in, and he's going to focus on using the radiation extremely sparingly, as if the radiation did not exist in his body. He wants to make it so that the radiation does not reside within Izuku at all. He can just produce it. That idea may trick Izuku's mind into actually not producing radiation passively within his body, which Nighteye assumes is probably a problem in general. So Izuku's training is that, to make it so that he feels no radiation residing in his body. Because Izuku, yes, he's used to it, you would know if there was radiation, if there was something within your body that you are concurrently controlling. So Izuku would do just that. Over the course of that day, he would just focus on that. It's just pure meditation and getting himself grounded to earth. Focusing, remembering, not wanting to hurt anybody, and keeping himself as calm as possible. Izuku would actually meet with therapists throughout this day for that said issue. They'd want him to get out any emotional occurrences or scary things he thinks about, or straight up anger that he's ever felt in his life, and talk about it immediately so that he doesn't have to deal with that out on the battlefield. Yes, there are going to be instances that his rage may take over. Heroes see that every day. Sometimes you'll see a kid getting tortured. You'll see an innocent man brutally killed. you'll need to have to focus that emotion into happiness, into calmness, into using that emotion in the battlefield properly, and not through the use of just pure anger and letting yourself go haywire. Izuku hears them loud and clear, and he's known about this for a while, but he's never thought about eliminating all his radioactive or radiation entirely. He's never even thought about something like that. He just thought that his body produced it naturally and there was no stopping it. So it would just be basically within his body as if it were breathing. You don't think about breathing, he doesn't think about producing it, but he does think about containing it. He begins to think more and more about not producing it at all, and eventually after that whole day, he got it down to a certain degree. Not perfectly. It takes so much concentration and so much calmness in his body for that to actually occur, and his body to basically dispel it within itself, but make it into nothingness, that it's almost arguably impossible, especially when he's walking around. Because any feeling, any out level of feeling, let's say he stubs his toe, that could cause him to produce it within his body again. Let's say he sees a sad movie, that could happen again. These simple, very simple terms, it all could happen just like that, as quickly as a snap of a finger. So him and Mirio the next day, or the third day of their training, would go out and begin this kind of worldly training session for him. He walks around, stays calm, and introduces himself to random people as Izuku Midoriya, a new hero. He would just continue to do this, and Mirio even questions why he doesn't have a hero name yet, and Izuku actually scratches his head. Oh yeah, you're right. I never even came up with one. I guess I'm gonna have to come up with one, but I'm not gonna worry about that right now. I need to focus on this. Mirio agrees. He doesn't mean to distract him from that, of course, but he'll still have to remind him maybe later at the end of their whole agency to come up with one. So Izuku would be focusing as hard as possible during their little patrols, coming across minor villains, but of course Mirio handles it with relative ease, and if he needs help from Izuku, Izuku can support by guiding people out and getting people out of harm's way. After some time though, Mirio gets a buzz on his phone, and that buzz begins to shake like crazy until he answers it. When he does, he hears the voice of Sir Nighteye, and Sir Nighteye tells him to get back to the agency right now, and it seems extremely urgent. Izuku does begin to get slightly paranoid, but remembers all of the training he's been doing, calming himself back down, and the radiation seems to filter out entirely and just disappear into nothingness again. They head back to, obviously, Sir Nighteye's agency, and all that radiation within his body, yes, it's gone for now, but when he hears the thing that he's about to hear, all that radiation would fill his body once again, because he hears from Sir Nighteye's mouth that one of his classmates has died. A classmate by the name of Tenya Ida has been killed by Stain, the hero killer. He's insanely just freaked out by this. Killed? One of us killed. How is it that possible? Sir Nighteye looks at Izuku and says that these are the things that he's going to have to deal with every single day. He's going to have to deal with them. And that this is a hero's job, and if he's not up for it, he shouldn't be a hero. Izuku nods and calms himself down once again, and Sir Nighteye smiles. You're getting used to it, kid. I'm proud of you. Look, I know these things are hard, and I have to be hard on you for those reasons. Because yes, you can be an extremely, extremely good asset in the field, but you could be the opposite if not trained well. We'll be seeing each other again pretty soon. The agency decided that we'll be sending you back a little early. I apologize for that. I believe that more training is definitely needed. But I promise, you continue down this road, you'll make it. And not only that, we'll be here to help. You don't need to worry about it, okay? Izuku is shocked to hear this. He's never heard such supporting words, especially from someone like Sir Nighteye. Yes, he's heard supporting words from Aizawa in his own Aizawa way, but nonetheless, he feels kind of welcomed, as if Mirio and Nighteye are completely on his side. Yes, it's going to be a tough road, especially with a quirk like his, and he realizes that he's not the only one, that there are various amounts of people out there that have quirks similar to his. So Izuku knows that he'll have to do exactly what he's doing for everyone else. For those people that may have powerful quirks, had powerful quirks that they couldn't use, and they were pushed to the point where they weren't allowed to use it. So they had to just do normal jobs. Their dream of being a hero would be just washed away. He wants to do it for them. and this would become extremely apparent when he arrives back in his class. When Aizawa speaks to his entire class, telling them that it is no more time for mourning, that they might be sad, but Tenya Ida will not die in vain, that they need to be stronger, they need to be faster, they need to be smarter, and they need to be even better heroes than Tenya would be. Izuku nods and just knows deep down inside that he can be a top hero. No, not a top hero. Izuku can be the #1 hero. Testing soon will prove that. He'll study like crazy, and he'll make sure he trains his quirk to the utmost limit. And over the course of this next week, until his final exam, he does just that. He not only trains his quirk, but trains his mind. He goes and sees Nighteye, or Sir Nighteye once again, and Sir Nighteye is happy to see the commitment that Izuku has, allowing him to speak with those therapists, with those emotional trainers, the people that can keep him calm, keep him ready, and keep him focused. And not only that, he studies with every classmate that he's ever had in terms of them being smart. Obviously, he has Momo Yaoyorozu. Bakugo himself is extremely smart as well. He studies with all of them. Yes, he's smart in his own right. Honestly, close to, if not on par with them. But nonetheless, he still wants to study with the smartest people he possibly can. He realized with Sir Nighteye that if you're the smartest person in that room, in the room that you're sitting in, maybe you shouldn't be in that room. Izuku wants to learn more, and this whole ordeal that happened with him passing out on the ground fighting his best friend, he realized that there's more to his quirk than what he was realizing. Sir Nighteye has showed him that, Aizawa has, and everything around him has as well. So he's going to make sure that he'll be the strongest hero. He's going to make sure that whatever happens in the near future, that he can be a top hero, the #1 hero. He's going to make sure he can do all of that. But as always, words are cheap. So Izuku knows what he has to do. He passes, obviously he knows how well he did on the written exam, but then he hears about the next exam. Supposedly it's supposed to be against robots, but Izuku knows better. He knows Aizawa, and he knows that it won't be against robots. It's going to be against something far different. It's going to be against the teachers. Soon they'd find out who their opponents were, and Izuku would find out that he and someone else, Katsuki Bakugo, were the last ones to have their little show-off or little fight with their teacher. But who's that teacher that they must face? Well, that's the one and only All Might. The #1 hero comes crashing down from the sky and begins to speak. I will be your opponent. Izuku looks at Bakugo, and Bakugo does the same. They nod at each other and fist bump and think that now it's time to show the fruits of their labor. Izuku has worked so hard to get to this point, so hard to fight right now, to make sure that he can be the strongest, and this is the first step. The first step is him and his best friend, Bakugo Katsuki, defeating All Might. And if they can do that, they'll be right on track with what they want to become in the near future as heroes themselves. But what would happen if Izuku lost control? Would something catastrophic happen? Injury is prone to happen. Would watching his best friend get hurt truly scold him for life, destroy his emotional state? Or did all of that training truly pay off? And will he be able to emotionally control himself, but also fight side to side with his best friend? Well, you'll have to find out on the next part of What If Deku Had a Radioactive Quirk. The final exam is now going to begin. After all of the other students are completely and done with their tests, it is now time for Bakugo and Izuku. Bakugo and Izuku are up against the #1 hero, All Might, the biggest challenge they will face. Frankly, these small amounts of weights that are going to be on All Might won't make that much of a difference. He is a force to be reckoned with, and they'll immediately realize that when they begin charging in to close in on his location. They've both decided that they want to test their limits and fight All Might himself, and Izuku wants to as well, exploding with his quirk, and Bakugo does as well. He's trying to keep up with how fast Bakugo is currently moving. It seems like Bakugo himself has been training as hard as possible to make sure that there's nobody that gets a leg up on him. They continue to charge forward, and just as they close in on All Might, a giant gust of wind comes barreling their way, Crashing into both of them, they try to dodge, grabbing onto some lampposts and then eventually regathering themselves. They both make a plan and split up. They run off to basically counter All Might and make sure that he can't react to both of them, at least at one-on-one vision. So immediately they come crashing in from different sides. All Might tries to react quick enough, blocking a hit from Bakugo, but then Izuku is able to land one blow to the stomach. When he does that, he releases a small bit of radiation to make sure that All Might would slowly but surely get toned down. His goal is just to slow down All Might. If he can slow them down, they can both escape. But it doesn't matter really. We're talking about the number one hero, All Might himself, someone that wields one for all, the strongest quirk around, someone that could basically knock you out in one punch. Will they be able to slow him down enough? Will they decide to just face All Might 1 or 2v1 and try to defeat him, or try to escape to pass this exam? Well, let's find out in part 3 of What If Deku Had a Radioactive Quirk. They begin to go blow for blow with All Might. Obviously, being far weaker than All Might, he begins to get the advantage relatively quickly, throwing Bakugo out of building, and immediately Izuku grabs onto All Might's arm. He grabs onto his arm and struggles to hold on for dear life, Izuku trying himself to make sure that he doesn't overexpose everyone to radiation. He's been training extremely hard to make sure this is the case, but of course, emotional states rise extremely high when in scenarios like this. He looks to his right to see his friend Bakugo pretty hurt as he struggles to his feet, bleeding out of the back of his head. Immediately, Bakugo charges back in and tells Izuku to basically throw some radiation up in the air toward All Might. And just as he does this, he explodes right on top of the radiation, and it actually creates a far bigger explosion, actually burning All Might slightly and pushing him back away. They both realize that their quirks together may actually be extremely beneficial depending how they use it. So they begin to try and sync up their attacks, and Bakugo is basically trying to use any setup from Izuku to do damage to All Might. This will either get him out of this fight entirely, or will hopefully more or less allow them to go to the gate and escape. So they continue their onslaught, but All Might then grabs both of their faces and slams them into the ground, almost knocking out Bakugo entirely and injuring Izuku pretty bad. With a gash on the back of his head and also a pretty hurt leg, Izuku begins to slightly panic, but he remembers in his head that he needs to focus, relax, focus on what's at hand, and he begins to regenerate. Using gamma radiation, he's regenerating, but it seems like this emotion is slowly but surely flooding within him. Anger. He's mad. Why does he feel so angry right now? He gets madder and madder, especially seeing his best friend on the ground, practically unconscious. His body begins to grow, breaking entirely his suits, and it seems like he is slightly bigger. No, not just slightly, 3, maybe 4 times bigger now. He looks at All Might, and he's almost as tall or maybe even taller than All Might now. They look dead into each other's eyes, and All Might is in complete shock. Izuku lands one giant punch to his stomach, sending him flying toward the gate. Izuku grabs Bakugo and jumps off toward the gate itself, beating on All Might. All Might sees what's happening and reverses it. Izuku is this wild cannon, or a loose cannon at this point. He is able to sweep his leg and get him on the ground, landing a stern punch to his face, but just as he does this, Izuku shrinks, and all the radiation that was within his body begins to dissipate and goes right to an unconscious Bakugo. Bakugo struggles to breathe now, and Izuku is almost out cold entirely. He's not going to be able to retract his radiation and help his best friend. All Might is shocked, but Izuku is struggling to his feet out of nowhere. All Might doesn't know what's happening, but he looks at his leg. It seems as if there's a cuff on it now. Izuku used that little glimpse of basically time to put that on his leg. He didn't realize that Izuku did have some control, but he was kind of being overwhelmed. In a last-ditch effort, Izuku was able to actually put the anklet on his leg without All Might knowing. Of course they win, but Izuku crawls over to Bakugo and begins to remove the radiation, but unfortunately he passes out before he's able to retract all the radiation from him. They're both taken to Recovery Girl's office, and they are both spoken to relatively quickly, and All Might watches as Bakugo is extremely sick, throwing up in basically every toilet imaginable, and Izuku is still out cold. They tell Bakugo that he just needs to hang in a little bit longer, and that they know that he feels extremely awful at this moment. He looks at Izuku and asks if he's really okay, and they say yes. It seems that he tried some new power out that he wasn't exactly ready for and didn't know the repercussions that would have happened right after. And Izuku eventually wakes up after hours, and unluckily enough, Bakugo had to suffer through that for hours as well, and the radiation was eventually taken out of Bakugo via Izuku. Bakugo immediately feeling a lot better, but Izuku personally feels bad. He put his friend in jeopardy, put everything in jeopardy. He's always been doing that. But All Might reassures him there's a whole reason why they're going to the training camp, and that's the whole reason, so that he doesn't put anybody else in jeopardy. This is a reason why he's in this school. He's trying to learn, trying to get better. That's the whole point. And Izuku hearing this does make him feel a lot better. He's heard it before, don't get me wrong, but just feeling this way all the time must put a mental drain on anybody. Eventually, he would be allowed to leave and head over to the forest training camp. And when they arrive, they actually arrive at a giant hill. And when they are told exactly what they're going to have to do, they're all pushed off the mountain and told that the training camp starts right then and there. They begin trying to blast through monster after monster, and Izuku uses this time to try his best to control his quirk, realizing that whole gamma power that he was using based on his emotion is probably the last thing he should be using. That was a giant risk that he took in that instance, and he never wants to take that again. The gamma power should be used for regeneration only, and not for a hyperextension of power like he did before. He realizes that now, and he'll make sure that he doesn't do it from here on out. He begins fighting through and through, and actually comboing up with Bakugo relatively well, in which Bakugo has to remind him that it wasn't his fault, that he was trying to actually ramp up his power and do something more and help them out, and there's nothing wrong with that. Bakugo in this instance, he's kind of annoyed, but then also not annoyed at the same time at Izuku's constant worry over everyone else. Of course, Bakugo does care about Izuku, but he also doesn't want him worrying about every little detail that he's ever dealt with in his life. So he tells him that there's a reason why they're training, and that everyone struggles with their quirk to a certain extent, and maybe they'll even meet someone eventually that is even in less control than him. Nonetheless, their forest training camp, at least you're going through all those monsters, is eventually finished up, and they're met by Aizawa and the Wild Pussycats. They tell him to get cleaned up, eat some food, get ready for bed, and that in the next morning, they're going to be training extremely hard. Eventually, after doing all of the small things, obviously getting cleaned up and stuff like that, that next morning, they weren't kidding. Their training begins off the bat. Izuku is actually tasked to fight multiple people at one after another and make sure that he doesn't lose control by any means, even if he sees another way out to win. Especially with his gamma radiation powers, Aizawa wants him to actually control it to the point that he just uses it for regeneration. Maybe one day, maybe when he's an adult and older, he'll actually be able to use it the way he did on basically against All Might to a bigger and better extent. But nonetheless, it's not the time for that, and it's too risky to actually go about it. Izuku continues training more and more, and eventually he does hear and learns about Koda. He talks to Koda a little bit and even actually chats with him about it, and Koda actually dismisses him. He doesn't really like Izuku, hearing about his risky quirk, and basically that he should choose not to ever be a hero. Izuku hearing this doesn't really take this personally. It's a little kid that he's sure that has gone through a lot, and there's good reason to think that Izuku shouldn't be a hero. There's good reason to think that, frankly, he should just kind of learn how to use his powers and make sure that he can never use them in any scenario. But he wants to be someone that can prove that he can help even though his quirk is extremely dangerous. He hopes for that at least, and maybe that can eventually get across to Koda. One night though, when they're all eating food, he realizes that Koda's absent, so he decides that he's going to actually bring him food as well. using his quirk, and obviously what he basically is copied from Bakugo, he kind of slowly but surely flies over to a slight mountaintop that he's seen Kota go to. He gives Kota the food and begins speaking with him about everything, about all of the stuff he's gone through and what he wants in his life. That he knows that his quirk is dangerous, that he lived in a bubble for years, that he wasn't able to see his friends, wasn't able to have a normal life, and frankly his life now isn't normal. He's still in a bubble. And Kota's confused at what he means. How is he still in a bubble? And he says that he's still in this radioactive bubble. He's trying to basically learn how to use his quirk to the point that he's not normal. Like, he'll never be normal. He's always going to be just some ticking time bomb. He's basically got a villain's power and he's trying to be a hero. Kota is completely shocked to hear this, but before he can say a word, another voice rises out of the ashes, or rises right out of the treetops, and begins to tell Izuku something. Yeah, you're right. It is more of a villain quirk. It would be more ideal on to have you on our side. Izuku is completely shocked. Who the hell is that? He grabs Kota and dashes away for a second, putting him down toward the exit of where that cliff is, and he looks to see a giant man. Izuku is telling Kota that he needs to go now, to not worry, but Kota refuses. Well, I guess it's less of a refusal and more of him being scared senseless to actually move. Izuku plants his feet and fires off a giant explosion using his radiation toward Muscular. Muscular doesn't feel a thing, telling Izuku that he stands no chance in this battle. Izuku thinks otherwise as he shoots out the ground as smoke goes everywhere, and he grabs Kota and blasts off using his explosions. Izuku begins to think that whatever that thing is, he'll have to fight him eventually, but right now he should get Kota to safety. He sees that the entire place that they're completely at is kind of overrun. There are villains everywhere, and eventually he gets back to the camp, dropping off Kota. Aizawa tells him that he needs to stay there. There is no basically him going out anymore. He needs to stay. But Izuku refuses. He wants to make sure everyone's okay, and he knows that other monster, Muscular, is there as well, so he blasts off to find Muscular. Eventually, he would come across him as he's approaching various Class 1B students. Izuku charging at Muscular, landing one blow to his face. Muscular is completely shocked as he can feel a slight burn mark, more than actually usual. Izuku is actually outputting more radiation as they speak. This time though, he's controlling it. He knows that he can't injure him if he holds back that much, so he's not holding back nowhere near as much as he did the first time around. He begins to throw explosions at Muscular, trying to keep him at bay, and even seeping radiation within him slowly but surely to degrade any quirk or anything that he can actually hold against him. Stamina, stuff like that, slowly but surely will go away and be sapped away from him. Muscular doesn't even realize this, and the more he starts using his quirk, it seems like the more he's getting drained, the more he's losing all his stamina, and Izuku is basically able to passively wear him down. That's until Muscular lands a clean shot to his jaw, landing clean entirely, and he gets smashed into the ground. Muscular is slowly fading away, but he just landed such a blow on Izuku that it's forcing him to try and regenerate. He begins to regenerate slowly, but it seems like Muscular is now on his feet. Muscular is now there and about to hit him, but just as he's about to, Bakugo comes out of nowhere and smashes his face basically right back into the ground using an explosion, and Muscular is already so fatigued that he's out cold. Bakugo tries to pick up Izuku and does just that, and basically has a bunch of other students help out, and they begin to try and go back to the camp. But just as they are, it seems like, well, Bakugo is gone in an instant. Well, how did this happen, and why would it happen? Bakugo at the sports festival, the one that Izuku did not see, well, he was a target from the villains. The villains saw the way he was acting, the villains knew of him and how he acts around others, and his quirk is so similar to a villain that why not try to get him on board? But the only problem is, they didn't know that Izuku himself probably has more of a villainous quirk. But the only issue was, he wasn't even allowed to use his quirk at the festival. So Bakugo is taken away, and Izuku tries to get him back, but unfortunately he fails. His best friend slips through a portal, and Izuku doesn't even know what to do. Izuku then just goes throughout life. The next 3 days or so are all just a blur. He barely remembers much. His stamina is practically nothing. He needs time to recover, and he does just that. Eventually though, he catches wind of a tracker that Momo Yaoyorozu has. It seems like he wants a copy of it, and he wants to go and, well, save his best friend, save Bakugo Katsuki. He gathers up a little team, and even though he's slightly injured, he goes out to do just that. He wants to save him and get out of there. But that plan would go to shambles quicker than you could possibly imagine. When they begin to head over, they're spotted far sooner than they ever would have guessed, and they all are forced to split up in a matter of seconds. They all try to keep in touch, and Izuku's the only one near the battlefield. It seems like he's the last chance that Bakugo has, and he immediately dives toward it and tries to get him out of there, as All For One and All Might are finally fighting and dueling their last time. Izuku tries to give Bakugo an opening to get out of harm's way, and they begin fighting together, syncing up their movements practically perfectly, defeating most of the villains that are currently in front of them. Eventually an opening is occurred, and they're able to slowly escape. But just as Bakugo is escaping and Izuku's right next to him, he tries to speak with Izuku, telling him basically thank you. But just as he looks back, he's not there. Izuku is getting dragged away by some quirk that All For One is currently using. All Might screams at All For One and punches him as hard as possible to try and get him away from Izuku, and he grabs Izuku's face. Izuku begins to panic and luckily is able to somewhat squirm away, and, well, All For One makes the choice to send his villain group away just in case, so that, well, they don't somehow die. All For One sees this boy as a possible, basically, quirk user that could be extremely powerful. Maybe if he somehow got his quirk, maybe if he somehow turned him over? No, he doesn't know, but he knows how strong he is. He's seen it. He can tell. Izuku regathers himself, but looks straight at All For One, and fear just goes through his body. Fear overwhelms him. He doesn't know what he's looking at. What the hell is this guy? His mind begins to race. His body begins to freak out as he stares at All For One. And everything after was just a blur. He doesn't even know what occurred. All he remembers was a week later waking up in a facility that had him completely restrained, and a facility that basically kept him there forever. That's what it felt like. He would just sit there, nothing else. Izuku didn't even know what was happening. He just saw that he was in his glass bubble once again, until finally someone approached and began speaking with him, and it was Aizawa. Aizawa told him that he needed to stay here until his quirk was fully under control. And he's confused. Wasn't that the whole reason why I was there at UA? And Aizawa says yes, but unfortunately they weren't able to control his quirk, and unfortunately he did something pretty bad. And he's not in trouble to an extent. UA has caught a lot of flack, but fortunately enough, they haven't been buried entirely. They're actually still okay. And luckily there were no casualties. Everybody got out safe. But Izuku's confused. What do you mean? What happened? What did I do? Back to when that day happened, Izuku went haywire. Izuku went nuclear. And he blew up that huge square mileage of that city they were in. And he wounded All For One so greatly that he needed actual medical treatment before he even went to Tartarus. So in a way, Izuku's a hero. He defeated All For One. But in another way, people are terrified. There's a split in society right now. And Aizawa makes that pretty apparent, telling Izuku that half of them believe that he's a hero. The other half believe that he's a risk. something bad waiting to happen, Izuku looks at Aizawa. What am I to you? A risk? Aizawa shakes his head. Kid, you're a hero. I've told you that since day one. It's hard. Everything is, especially with a quirk like yours. Trust me. I know. We understand. Izuku would be left there for another week or so, maybe even more. But eventually, someone would actually come up. It would be Aizawa again, but this time with Nezu. And Izuku tells him that he's been working hard, trying to learn his quirk. And he promises that he'll make sure that he'll never do something like this again. And he says that when he gets out, he'll make sure to make them all proud. But Aizawa cuts him off. We were never not proud of you, kid. You've been through a shit ton. A lot more than most. And we realize the struggle behind that. But we did bring someone. Someone actually wanted to hear about you and speak to you. Immediately, Izuku's confused. Who? Mirio? Nighteye? What's happening? But just as he begins to question, a little girl walks into frame. Walks in right in front of the glass and waves to Izuku, saying that she's heard a lot about him. That Mirio has told, or Lemillion has told her a ton. And Izuku was on such a high pedestal with Sir Nighteye. They've talked about him, or were talking about him before. Izuku's confused, and he looks at Aizawa's face and can tell Sir Nighteye is not alive anymore. Luckily Mirio is, but Sir Nighteye isn't. He's happy to see that this little girl, whatever she went through, got out. But he questions why she basically wanted to meet him so badly, and he learns that her quirk may be even more haywire than his. Izuku has trained so much to control it, and Aizawa wanted him to speak with her about controlling it as well. Izuku does just that, saying that anybody can be a hero, and then he looks around his glass and his little bubble and tells her that even though he's behind these bars, behind this glass, that he promises that he'll be out, and that he'll be a hero just like Lemillion, just like Sir Nighteye. He's already created a bond with Eri, already created this brotherly and sisterly bond with her based on their quirks alone. He knows the terrible things that could happen if they let their quirks go completely out of control. And he now has another reason to work hard, not only for his mother that visits him from time to time, bringing him some of his favorite foods, but also for this little girl, for her, for Eri, making sure that the next generation that doesn't just include him realizes that yes, struggle is one thing, but giving up is another, and that Izuku will not give up. So he's going to make sure he trains harder and harder. And that's exactly what he does over a course of months. Unfortunately, he misses out on so much. Of course, he does his regular schoolwork. That's just kind of his life. But he misses out on so much until he hears more and more destruction. More and more of this war going outside. He doesn't know what's happening. That's until someone approaches him, and it's actually Mirio. Mirio has his quirk back, telling him that Eri basically gave it back to him, and at one point it was gone. Izuku was out of the loop so much, and he asks Mirio what he wants and what's even going on. We need you. We need you bad. You need to help us. Izuku's confused. I don't even have full control over my quirk yet. What do you want me to do? Mirio says that there's one job, that there's a team out by basically a certain part of Japan fighting a giant monster, and that it's up to him to defeat it, and that with his quirk, he'll be able to. And if he wants to, well, make up for what he did, even though it wasn't his fault and many think that he's a hero, including Lemillion, he knows how guilty Izuku feels. He knows that even though there's people out there that make him out to be a hero, he wants to prove that he's a hero to everybody. So it's time to prove it. Izuku watches as the screen in front of him goes down, and these other soldiers come out and basically tell him that he's free to go. That this is not a time to keep him here, especially when he can help. So what is Izuku going to fight? What is he going to go head to head against? He's not even sure. But the team that is nearby and currently fighting is told to stand down and leave. because their secret weapon has now been released. Izuku has now been given a chance for proper redemption. Redemption that maybe many others don't believe he needs, and doesn't obviously believe that he's a bad person by any means, but he wants to prove it to himself. Prove it to the young girl that visited him, the young girl that said that he was a hero. The young girl that went through very similar things, if not way worse things than Izuku has ever, and that he is an inspiration to her. How could he ever give up the chance of true redemption? Redemption that he doesn't even know how will go. Maybe it will end in his death. Maybe it will end with him standing on top of the kingdom, top of the mountain, showing everyone that he is a true hero, and now he can compete to be the number one. But he's heard about everything that's going on. He's not in prison by any means. He's been hearing a big chunk of it. He knows that Mirio is a wielder of One for All, and that he'll be fighting a man by the name of Shigaraki, someone he's seen and faced before as well. He knows that Shigaraki is a far different person compared to what he once was, far more powerful. So he knows that whatever fight he's going to have to go headfirst against is going to be a hard one. But nonetheless, he takes the words of Mirio to heart, and he goes straight for the mountains. Straight for the mountains to fight a monstrous being by the name of Gigantomachia. Izuku will now face the monster. A true monster. Izuku heads over toward the mountain, and he sees actually a team of heroes going away from it currently as they speak, and they see Izuku. Multiple of them smile, realizing that Izuku has now arrived and that he might be able to take this monster down. Some look at him in disbelief, thinking that maybe he should not be let out at all. Maybe he'll just do more harm than good. Nonetheless, Izuku doesn't even look at either side of their eyes. Doesn't look at the way one is looking at another. He doesn't care. He's doing this for himself, doing this for Eri, and doing this for the people who care. So he walks up, and when he arrives at the mountain, he sees Gigantomachia and a horde of villains laying waste to the land. Izuku stands in front of the giant monster and eventually is spotted. Gigantomachia stares at him and questions, in his own little way, where the other heroes have went. There are no other heroes. It's just me. And I am no hero. At least not yet. Me and you, big guy. That's the final straw. That's all it will take. I lose, I'm no longer a hero. I win, I can continue down the path of one. Izuku raises his hands as Gigantomachia comes charging forward at the threat. Izuku plants his feet and his body begins to expand, and he begins to get madder and madder, but then he begins to calm down. Gigantomachia is then stopped in his tracks. He's then picked up slightly off the ground and then flipped, slammed on his back. Immediately, Izuku is on the offensive and begins to fight Gigantomachia, trying to inflict any damage, realizing that the damage is basically gone, nullified. There is nothing there. He realizes that he's there for a reason, and that it has to do at least with putting him to sleep or putting him something in a catatonic state of some sort. So Izuku begins to focus and begins to shrink back down. Gigantomachia mocks him slightly and kind of in his own childish little mannerisms say that little man became big man and then now is small man. Immediately Izuku expands his aura, it seems, but no, it's just radiation. All of the entire army, including Gigantomachia, is then covered in this green mist. The mist becomes thicker and thicker and thicker as you can hear coughing in the distance. Izuku keeps producing this radiation until he knows and sees a giant shadow slowly walk toward him. That giant shadow is Gigantomachia, who is not asleep yet. He smacks Izuku in the face extremely hard, which wouldn't be really smacking him in the face, it would be just smacking him entirely. He flies into a mountain, slamming into it. He looks toward Gigantomachia as he's stumbling toward Izuku. The radiation has taken its effect, and Izuku now has the radiation and control of the radiation in all of their bodies. helping out the other people that would eventually die if he allowed them to have that much radiation or nuclear radiation in their body. But a Gigantomachia, on the other hand, he begins to concentrate it into his brain and in certain parts of his brain so that he'd eventually fall asleep. Gigantomachia tries to run at Izuku, but slowly but surely, he gets slower and slower and slower, stopping in his tracks as Gigantomachia passes out and falls right in front of a bleeding Izuku. Izuku touches his head and realizes that there's a giant gash in the back of it and a really, really bad mark in the side of his leg. He begins to heal using his gamma radiation, and he looks straight at the giant body of Gigantomachia and is happy. Ideally enough, he just defeated the monster, and he begins to actually move over and try to fly off to get some help so that they can detain Gigantomachia. Just as he's trying to fly away though, he collapses to the ground, landing and begins limping, trying to walk, but just as he does that, he falls to the ground entirely. But just as he does this, he's caught by somebody. He looks up and it's Bakugo. Bakugo smirks and tells him that he's such an idiot. He didn't know how strong he would actually get, especially after being on his own that long. Izuku then puts his arm around him so that he can get some help as they dash off back toward actually UA itself. A bunch of the scientists that have been working with Izuku wants Izuku right back into his quarantine to make sure everything's fine, but Bakugo refuses this and tells them that they're under attack. This is a war. Izuku cannot be out there, or needs to be out there in the war and not behind a glass cage. He tells Izuku to get some rest and to meet them on the battlefield when he's ready, that there's a far bigger problem than just Gigantomachia. The team that was basically there to fight Gigantomachia is shocked to see Izuku not only alive, but the victor of that battle. Some of them aren't surprised at all. They knew the potential of Izuku, including Midnight herself, thanking him, saying that she wasn't sure that she would be able to get the job done, and personally feels bad to leave it to a student to basically do what she couldn't. Izuku smiles and says that it's fine, that he just needs recovery time, and that he's going to go back out and he'll help them out as soon as possible. Just as he says this, Eri walks up to him. This is the first time Eri's actually seeing Izuku outside of a glass cage, and she jumps and hugs him, and Izuku smiles, saying that she barely knows him, and that she only knows stories, and that there is basically no guarantee that he'll live up to what she thinks he is. But Izuku is immediately confirmed to be a hero. Eri believes it, Midnight believes it, and all of his classmates believe it. Izuku is more than just a hazard sign. He's more than just a quirk. He's a person that is willing to risk it all to save everybody else, even if that means he dies. Eri smiles and nods as basically telling him that she agrees with everybody else, and puts out her hand as this electricity-like thing begins to surround him, and out of nowhere, he feels like he hasn't been hurt at all. He feels like replenished. He feels exactly how he felt right before the fight. Eri smiles and tells him to go help Lemillion and go help his best friend, and that he can truly be the hero he wants to be. Obviously in her own little kiddish way, but everyone is shocked to see the control that Eri has, and obviously Izuku knew of this, but didn't know or didn't really think about it at the time. Izuku blasts away at insane speeds, using the radiation or his nuclear radiation in his hands and concentrating it so that it doesn't hit anybody else as he arrives on the battlefield. When he arrives though, he begins to see a deformed version of Shigaraki. Shigaraki is now more powerful than anybody could actually believe. All for One though is nowhere to be seen. It seems like Shigaraki is on a whole nother level. He watches as basically all of these heroes try to fight him at once, but it seems like they're not really getting anywhere. Just as he sees this, and just as he's realizing that they're not getting much of anywhere, he dashes forward trying to help them out. But he sees Bakugo about to be impaled by a ton of tendrils. He punches Bakugo out of the way as he gets destroyed, at least gets punctured by these tendrils, and he falls to the ground. Everybody is in shock that Izuku just made it to the battlefield and saved them, but now he's extremely injured, But just as Bakugo is about to basically run over to see if he's okay, more tendrils fly toward him. He dodges, but then remembers something. Izuku can heal, and now he's using this as an opening. He heals himself, and Shigaraki backs them all away from Izuku. He begins to think that he needs that. He needs Izuku. That quirk that he has leveled a city. He needs that quirk specifically. Yes, he wants one for all, but this would make things a lot easier. He begins to walk over to Izuku, and they play it off as if, or at least Bakugo plays it off, the rest of them really think that Izuku is in danger here. Shigaraki walks over and is about to basically grab him, but just as he does, Izuku grabs both of his arms and pins him to the ground and begins to irradiate all of this nuclear radiation all around them both, making this tomb of some sorts. Izuku is now taking over. He is now his own nuclear reactor. Izuku has now gone atomic. He's about to make sure that there is no remnants of Shigaraki, but most of them begin to tell him that they need him alive, that they can't stoop to the level of these villains. Izuku realizes this and even hears their calls as he's weakening Shigaraki slowly but surely using his radiation. His quirk, his regeneration quirk, cannot keep up. Izuku continues to pump radiation after radiation, and any wound that he gets, he pushes himself beyond it. All the scratches, the claws, the sharp points, and basically all the strikes Shigaraki is hitting him with in their tomb of radiation, he's regenerating. He's going to hang on. He's going to drain himself as much as possible before he lets go of the hold he has on Shigaraki, eventually leading to both of them out cold on the ground. They're completely and utterly in shock, but just as they're basically beginning to think that it's over, Izuku's body begins to spasm. It begins to freak out, and it begins to release radiation like crazy. They tell Aizawa to cancel his quirk, but he tries, and it doesn't work. It's all excess radiation that he was consumed with, but just as they think that maybe this whole city is going to be overrun with radiation and become a wasteland, Izuku's one eye opens up, and he begins to suck all the radiation back into himself and disperse it within his body evenly and securely, and nobody is infected or hurt by that radiation that he was emitting at that point. He slowly gets up and he looks at Shigaraki and tells them they need to get him under wraps right now, and that Gigantomachia is also down. They're all shocked. This means that they now have a leg up. They have a leg up on all of these villains, and maybe, just maybe, they can shut down all the efforts that are soon to come. There's one thing that they didn't keep an account for. One thing that All For One didn't think about, and that was Izuku. Izuku being let out of his cage, being let out of that fiberglass, that he was going to be let out and let loose. He didn't think that the heroes would take the risk of injuring or killing anybody, and he didn't think that Izuku would even be able to master or even get close enough to mastering his quirk to basically keep everybody safe enough without basically exterminating a good portion of the city. But he was wrong. For the first time in a long time, All For One was wrong. And now, the heroes of My Hero Academia now have the upper hand and now have their secret weapon, Shigaraki, locked up and now in a facility that nobody will get into. What will the villains do now? Will they even be able to stand up to the heroes, the new heroes, the next generation that is soon to come knocking on their door? Well, that's a story for another time and a story for another day. And let's hope Izuku Midoriya will finally get a wrap on his radioactive quirk and finally become the hero he wanted to be.
I don't wanna waste what's left.